A Navy SEAL's wife screamed in terror as an HOA president barged into her delivery room and grabbed her newborn baby. The mother was helpless, bleeding, and desperate. But when her husband heard that scream, he appeared in just 8 seconds. What happened next shocked everyone in the hospital. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The delivery room smelled of antiseptic and hope. Sarah clutched the hospital bed rails, her knuckles white as another contraction ripped through her body. Sweat plastered her dark hair to her forehead, and her hospital gown clung to her trembling frame. "You're doing great, Sarah," the nurse said, checking the monitors. "Just a few more pushes." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Her husband Jake was deployed somewhere in the Middle East. She had tried calling him hours ago when her water broke, but the call went straight to voicemail. Now she was alone, bringing their first child into the world without him. "I can see the head," Dr. Martinez announced. "One more big push, Sarah." Sarah screamed, pouring every ounce of strength into that final push. The pain was blinding, all-consuming, but then suddenly it stopped. A tiny cry filled the room, and Sarah's heart exploded with love. "It's a girl," the doctor said, holding up the small, pink bundle. Sarah sobbed with joy, reaching out her arms. "Let me hold her. Please, let me hold my baby." The nurse quickly cleaned the newborn and was bringing her to Sarah when the delivery room doors suddenly burst open with a violent bang. "There you are," a shrill voice pierced the sacred moment. Sarah's blood ran cold. Standing in the doorway was Margaret Henderson, the president of their neighborhood HOA. She was a tall, thin woman in her late 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and a face twisted in righteous fury. "Mrs. Henderson?" Sarah gasped, confused and exhausted. "What are you doing here?" Margaret stormed into the room, her heels clicking aggressively on the tile floor. "What am I doing here?" "I'm here because you've violated HOA Regulation 47B, Section 3. The nurse stepped between Margaret and Sarah. "Ma'am, you can't be in here. This is a sterile delivery room. Don't you dare tell me where I can and cannot go," Margaret snapped. "I have every right to be here. This woman signed a contract." Dr. Martinez looked up from where she was finishing the delivery. "Security. We need security in delivery room 4 immediately." But Margaret was already moving around the nurse. Her eyes were fixed on the tiny baby the nurse was holding. "That child is in violation of community standards. Your lawn has been unmowed for 3 weeks. Your garage door has been left open overnight. And you painted your mailbox without HOA approval." Sarah tried to sit up, panic flooding her exhausted body. "Please, I just gave birth. My husband is deployed. I've been on bed rest for weeks." The doctor ordered it. "That's not my problem," Margaret said coldly. "The rules are the rules. And now you've brought a child into this world in a home that's in violation. I've calculated the fines. You owe $17,000. The nurse holding the baby backed away toward Sarah. "Ma'am, you need to leave now." "Give me that baby," Margaret demanded. Time seemed to stop. Sarah watched in horror as Margaret lunged forward and actually grabbed her newborn daughter from the nurse's arms. "No!" Sarah screamed, trying to get out of the bed. Pain shot through her body, but she didn't care. "Give me my baby. Give me my baby." The baby started crying, a heartbreaking wail that tore through Sarah's soul. Margaret held the infant away from her body like she was contaminated. "Until those fines are paid, I'm placing a lien on everything you own," Margaret said. "Including this child. She was born to parents in debt to the HOA." Dr. Martinez grabbed for the baby. "You psychopath. Give me that infant right now." Margaret jerked away, and the baby's cries grew more desperate. Sarah was sobbing, trying to climb out of the bed despite the doctor's orders. Blood soaked through her gown. The nurse was shouting. The machines were beeping frantically. My baby, Sarah wept. Please, she needs me. She needs to nurse. Please, she's only 2 minutes old. Margaret's face showed no mercy. You should have thought about that before you violated HOA regulations. Actions have consequences. The baby was screaming now, her tiny face red, her small fists waving helplessly in the air. Sarah could see her daughter's distress, could hear the terror in those newborn cries, and something inside her shattered. I'll pay anything, Sarah begged, her voice breaking. Please, just give me my daughter. Please, I'm begging you. $17,000, Margaret repeated. Cash or certified check. Until then, I'm taking her. She turned toward the door, still holding the screaming infant. Sarah's vision went dark at the edges. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Her daughter, her precious baby girl, was being stolen right in front of her eyes. The nurse lunged at Margaret, but the older woman was surprisingly strong. She shoved the nurse backward and kept moving toward the door. Somebody help me. Sarah screamed with everything she had left. She's taking my baby. Dr. Martinez was on the phone, shouting at security, asking where they were, why they weren't there yet. Margaret reached the door, one hand on the handle, the other clutching the screaming newborn. Sarah felt her heart literally breaking. She could feel it cracking in her chest like ice. Her daughter's cries were getting weaker, more desperate. The baby needed her mother. She needed to be held, to be comforted, to feel safe in this terrifying new world. Please, Sarah whispered, her voice destroyed by sobbing. She's innocent. She's just a baby. Please don't hurt her. Margaret's hand turned the doorknob. And then 8 seconds changed everything. The delivery room door exploded inward. A figure in full military combat gear materialized in the doorway like an avenging angel. Jake Mitchell stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, 220 pounds of pure muscle and focused rage. His Navy SEAL uniform was still dusty from whatever mission he'd just left. His face was covered in combat paint. His green eyes were the coldest thing Sarah had ever seen. But when those eyes landed on her, they softened for just a microsecond. Sarah, he breathed. Then his gaze shifted to Margaret, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. That's my daughter, Jake said quietly. His voice was calm, controlled, absolutely terrifying. Put her down. Margaret's face had gone pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. I have legal right to. Jake moved. Sarah had seen her husband train. She'd watched him run obstacle courses, practice hand-to-hand combat, prepare for missions. But she had never seen him move like this. He crossed the room in 3 strides. His hand shot out and gripped Margaret's wrist with surgical precision. The HOA president gasped in pain and shock, her fingers involuntarily releasing their grip. Jake caught his daughter with his other hand, cradling her against his chest with the gentleness of a man holding the most precious thing in the universe. The baby's cries immediately began to quiet. Even at only minutes old, she somehow recognized safety. 8 seconds, Jake said, looking at Margaret with those cold, lethal eyes. From the moment my wife screamed, it took me 8 seconds to reach this room. I was in the parking lot when I heard her. Do you understand what that means? Margaret tried to jerk her wrist free, but Jake's grip was unbreakable. It means, Jake continued, his voice like steel wrapped in silk, that I heard everything. Every word you said to my wife. Every threat you made. Every moment you held my daughter against her will. I have legal documents, Margaret stammered, fear finally creeping into her voice. Your wife signed a contract. The HOA has rights. You have the right to remain silent, a new voice said from the doorway. 2 police officers entered, followed by hospital security. The lead officer, a woman with sergeant stripes, looked at Margaret with disgust. Margaret Henderson, you're under arrest for kidnapping, child endangerment, assault, trespassing, and about 15 other charges I'm going to enjoy reading to you." Jake released Margaret's wrist, and she immediately stumbled backward. The sergeant moved forward with handcuffs. "This is ridiculous," Margaret protested. "I'm the president of a homeowners association. I have standing in the community. You can't arrest me for enforcing regulations." "You grabbed a newborn infant from a nurse in a delivery room," the sergeant said flatly. "You attempted to remove her from the hospital against the mother's will. Ma'am, that's not enforcing regulations. That's kidnapping. And it's a federal crime when the parent is a military spouse." Margaret's face crumbled as the handcuffs clicked shut. "But the fines, the violations. She broke the rules." "The rules?" Jake said, still holding his daughter close. His voice was shaking now, not with fear but with barely controlled fury. "My wife was on bed rest. Doctor's orders. She was carrying our child and doing everything she could to keep her safe. She couldn't mow the lawn because she literally couldn't stand without risking our daughter's life." He took a step toward Margaret, and even the police officers tensed. "I was deployed," Jake continued. "Serving our country, defending the freedoms that allow petty tyrants like you to exist. And while I was gone, you terrorized my pregnant wife. You threatened her. You sent her violation notices while she was too sick to leave bed. And then, on the most important day of her life, you violated the sanctity of a delivery room and put your hands on my newborn daughter." Tears were streaming down Jake's face now, mixing with the combat paint. "If you ever," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more frightening than a shout, "ever come near my family again, they will never find your body. Do you understand me?" Margaret nodded frantically, all her arrogance gone. The sergeant led her away. As Margaret passed through the door in handcuffs, other patients and hospital staff had gathered in the hallway. They began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder and louder until the applause echoed through the entire floor. One elderly woman in a wheelchair rolled forward and looked Margaret directly in the eyes. "Shame on you," she said quietly. "Shame on you for what you did to that poor mother and her baby." Margaret tried to look away, but the sergeant kept her steady. More voices joined in from the hallway. "Monster," someone shouted. "How could you grab a newborn baby?" another voice cried out. A young nurse, barely out of nursing school, stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. "I have a baby at home," she said, her voice shaking. "If someone had done to my child what you did to that innocent newborn, I don't know what I would have done. You're evil. Pure evil." Margaret's legs buckled, and the sergeant had to hold her up. The weight of what she had done was finally crashing down on her. All around her, people were staring with disgust and anger. There was no sympathy in their eyes. No understanding. Only righteous fury at the violation she had committed. "Keep moving," the sergeant said firmly, guiding Margaret toward the elevator. But even as they walked, people continued to emerge from hospital rooms, staff members stopped their work, and everyone watched as the woman who had committed the unthinkable was led away in handcuffs. A Dr. Sarah had never met called out, "I hope they throw away the key." The elevator doors finally closed, cutting off the angry voices. But through the small window, Sarah could see people still gathered in the hallway, still talking, still processing what they had witnessed. The story would spread through the hospital like wildfire. By tomorrow, everyone would know about the HOA president who had tried to kidnap a newborn from a delivery room. Jake turned away from the scene and walked to Sarah's bed. His hands were trembling as he gently placed their daughter in Sarah's arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I got your voicemail and I moved heaven and earth to get back. I chartered a private plane. I broke about 40 different military regulations. But I wasn't here when you needed me." Sarah was crying so hard she could barely breathe. She held their daughter close, feeling the baby's tiny heartbeat against her chest. "You came. When I needed you most, you were here in 8 seconds. Jake climbed onto the hospital bed beside her, carefully wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter. His body was still shaking with adrenaline and emotion. I heard you scream, he said softly. I was checking my messages in the parking lot. I had just landed and I was running to get inside. And I heard you scream, she's taking my baby, through the phone. The voicemail was still recording. I've never moved so fast in my life. He paused, his voice becoming even more emotional. Sarah, I was in a war zone 3 days ago. I've faced enemy fire. I've been in situations where one wrong move meant death. But nothing has ever terrified me like hearing you scream for our daughter. In that moment, every combat instinct I had kicked in. I dropped everything. I didn't care about regulations or protocols. I just ran. Sarah touched his face gently, feeling the rough combat paint under her fingers. You were in a war zone 3 days ago. I told my commander I needed emergency leave. He said no. I told him my wife was in labor and I was going home whether he approved it or not. He threatened to court-martial me. Jake laughed bitterly. I told him to go ahead and try. That no military regulation was going to keep me from my wife and child. Jake, you could lose your career, Sarah said, worry creeping into her voice. I don't care, Jake said firmly. They can take my rank. They can discharge me. They can do whatever they want. But I will not miss the birth of my daughter. I will not leave my wife alone to face something like this. My family comes first. Always. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. What did he say? He finally approved it. Said he'd cover for me. Said any man who wouldn't move heaven and earth for his family wasn't a man he wanted in his unit anyway. Jake smiled through his own tears. Then he arranged the fastest transport home he could manage. I've been traveling for 48 hours straight to get here. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. She grabbed her, Jake. She just reached out and grabbed our baby like she was taking a piece of property. I've never felt so helpless. I know, baby. I know. Jake pressed his lips to Sarah's hair, then gently kissed their daughter's tiny head. But she's safe now. You're both safe. The nurse approached cautiously, a warm smile on her face despite the tears in her eyes. I hate to interrupt, but we still need to do some standard newborn checks. And Mom needs some attention too. You lost more blood than we'd like when you tried to get up. Jake nodded and carefully moved off the bed. But he didn't let go of Sarah's hand. Dr. Martinez came over, her own eyes red. That was the most horrifying thing I've ever witnessed in a delivery room. Sarah, I want you to know that I've already contacted hospital administration. We're reviewing our security protocols. What happened today should never have been possible. She turned to Jake. Mr. Mitchell, I need you to understand something. When your wife tried to get out of that bed to reach your daughter, she tore some of her stitches. She was bleeding heavily. She could have seriously injured herself. But she didn't hesitate. Not for a second. She was going to get to that baby no matter what it cost her. Jake looked at Sarah with even more love and admiration. That's because she's the strongest person I know. The maternal instinct is powerful, Dr. Martinez continued. I've seen mothers do incredible things to protect their children. But what I witnessed today was beyond anything in my 30 years of practice. Sarah, you literally tried to walk through your own pain and injury to reach hope. That's the kind of love that changes the world. Sarah was crying again, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. I just couldn't let her take my baby. I couldn't. No mother could, the doctor said softly. And no mother should ever have to face what you faced today. I promise you, we're going to make sure this never happens to another family in this hospital. The sergeant who had arrested Margaret appeared in the doorway again. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, I wanted to give you an update. We've been investigating Mrs. Henderson for months. What happened today was the final piece we needed to build a case against her. She's been targeting military families specifically throughout the county. Jake's jaw clenched. How many families? At least 40 that we know of. She researched deployment schedules. She identified which neighborhoods had high concentrations of military families. Then she deliberately moved into those neighborhoods, got herself elected to HOA boards, and began her campaign of harassment and extortion. The sergeant shook her head in disgust. She's a predator who specifically hunts vulnerable people. Sarah felt sick. Why military families? Because you're vulnerable when one spouse is deployed. Because you often can't fight back as easily, because the deployed service member can't be there to defend their family. The sergeant's voice was hard. She's a coward who preys on the families of heroes. What happens now? Jake asked. Now she faces federal charges. The FBI is involved because she crossed state lines in her schemes. She's looking at decades in prison, possibly life. And every family she victimized will have the chance to testify against her. The nurse finished checking the baby and brought her back to Sarah. She's perfect. All her vitals are excellent. Have you chosen a name? Sarah looked at Jake, and something passed between them. They had discussed names for months, but suddenly those names seemed wrong. Their daughter had come into the world fighting. She deserved a name that meant something. Hope, Sarah said softly. Her name is Hope. Jake's eyes filled with fresh tears. Hope Mitchell. It's perfect. 3 days later, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. Jake had spent every moment by her side, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair, changing Hope's diapers, bringing Sarah food and water, doing everything he could to make up for the trauma of the delivery day. When they pulled into their driveway, Sarah felt her anxiety spike. The house looked the same as always, but now it felt contaminated. Margaret had been here. She had watched from somewhere, stalking, planning her attack. We're not staying long, Jake promised, sensing her distress. Just long enough to pack what we need and move to temporary housing on base. I've already arranged it. They walked inside, and Sarah was immediately struck by how empty the house felt. It had been her sanctuary during the pregnancy, but now it was just a place. Just walls and furniture. A knock at the front door startled them both. Jake's posture immediately shifted into combat readiness. Stay here, he ordered. Sarah heard voices, and then Jake returned with a group of people. She recognized their neighbors, people she had seen around the neighborhood but never really known. Sarah, Jake said gently, these folks want to talk to you. An older man stepped forward. He had tears in his eyes. Mrs. Mitchell, my name is Robert Chen. I live 3 houses down. I wanted to come here and apologize. Sarah was confused. Apologize for what? For not helping you, for not stopping Margaret. We all knew what she was doing. We all saw how she was targeting you, especially after your husband deployed. And we did nothing. We were cowards. A woman beside him nodded. I'm Patricia. I live across the street. I watched Margaret park outside your house for hours. I saw her following you. And I convinced myself it wasn't my business. But when we heard what happened at the hospital, what she tried to do to your baby, we realized we had enabled a monster. More neighbors crowded into the doorway, all of them with similar stories. They had been victims of Margaret too. They had paid her illegal fines. They had lived in fear of her threats. But they had been too afraid to stand together. We've all filed police reports, Robert said. Every family in this neighborhood that Margaret victimized is cooperating with the investigation. And we wanted to come here and tell you that we're sorry. We should have protected you. Sarah didn't know what to say. Part of her was angry at them for not helping sooner. But a bigger part understood. Margaret had been a bully with legal authority. Thank you for coming forward now, Sarah finally said. It means a lot. Patricia stepped closer. We also took up a collection. All the neighbors contributed. We know you lost money paying Margaret's fake fines, and we know you're planning to move. This should help. She handed Sarah an envelope. Inside was a check for $15,000. Sarah gasped. I can't accept this. Please, Robert said. We need to do this. We need to make this right, even just a little bit. What happened to you, what happened to your baby, that's on all of us for not speaking up sooner. Jake put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Thank you. Thank you for standing up now. It takes courage to admit when we've failed each other. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the courtroom with hope in her arms. The baby had grown into a beautiful, healthy infant with Jake's green eyes and Sarah's dark hair. She babbled happily, unaware of the gravity of the proceedings. Margaret Henderson sat at the defendant's table, looking nothing like the arrogant HOA president who had terrorized them. She wore an orange jumpsuit, her hair now gray and limp. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the defendant has been convicted on 17 counts of fraud, 12 counts of extortion, 1 count of stalking, 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count of child endangerment, and numerous other charges. The prosecution recommends the maximum sentence. Margaret's lawyer stood as well. Your Honor, my client is a first-time offender. She has expressed remorse. Remorse? The judge's voice was ice. Your client kidnapped a newborn infant from a delivery room. She terrorized military families while their loved ones were deployed serving our country. She stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where exactly is this remorse? The lawyer had no answer. The judge looked at Margaret. Do you have anything to say? Margaret stood slowly. I was just enforcing the rules. People need to follow the rules. Order. The judge's expression was disgusted. You call stealing from families order? You call stalking a pregnant woman order? You call ripping a baby from a nurse's arms order? He leaned forward. You targeted military families specifically. You waited until the soldiers were deployed, unable to defend their families, and then you terrorized their spouses. You stole from people who serve our country. And when confronted with a woman in labor, you saw not a human being but a violation to be corrected. Margaret's face had gone pale. You grabbed a newborn infant, the judge continued. A child who had been alive for less than 3 minutes. You traumatized that child, her mother, and the medical staff. He picked up his sentencing document. Margaret Henderson, I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison for the kidnapping charge. 15 years for the stalking charge. 10 years for each count of fraud and extortion. All sentences to be served consecutively. You will spend the rest of your natural life behind bars. Margaret collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Furthermore, the judge said, you are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling $1.3 million. Your house, your car, all your assets will be seized and sold. He looked directly at Sarah and Jake. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that justice has been served today. This woman will never hurt anyone again. Sarah was crying, but they were tears of relief. Jake wrapped his arms around both his girls, and Hope giggled, reaching up to grab her father's face. It's over, Jake whispered. It's finally over. 1 year after that terrible day in the delivery room, Sarah stood in the backyard of their new house. It was a beautiful property on 5 acres of land, 30 miles from the nearest HOA. They had a garden, a swing set for Hope, and a view of the mountains. Hope was learning to walk, taking wobbly steps across the grass before falling and giggling. She was a happy baby, full of laughter and joy, with no memory of the trauma that had marked her birth. Jake came outside carrying lemonade. He had been home for 8 months now, having taken a training position at the local naval base. No more deployments. Hard to believe it's been a year, he said, sitting beside Sarah on the porch swing. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, Sarah admitted. I still have nightmares. I dream that Margaret takes Hope and I can't catch them. I wake up screaming. I know. I hear you. Jake pulled her close. But then you get up, and you check on Hope, and she's there. She's safe. I'm in therapy now, Sarah said. The nightmares are getting better. Dr. Williams says I have PTSD from the delivery. She says it's completely normal. Are the sessions helping? Yes. She's teaching me grounding techniques. Ways to remind myself that Hope is safe, that Margaret is in prison, that we're okay. Sarah paused. She also said that trauma can either break us or make us stronger. And I've decided I'm not going to let Margaret break me. Jake smiled. That's my girl. Hope toddled over, her chubby arms raised. Dada, Mama. They both reached for her, lifting her onto the swing between them. Hope clapped her hands and laughed, utterly secure in her parents' love. I've been thinking about starting a support group, Sarah said. For other military spouses who've been targeted by HOAs or scams while their partners were deployed. I talked to some of the other families from our old neighborhood, and they think it's a good idea. I think it's a great idea, Jake said. You could help a lot of people. I want something good to come from what happened. I want Hope to grow up knowing that when bad things happen, we don't just hide. We fight back. We help others. Jake kissed the top of her head. She's going to grow up to be just like her mother. Strong, brave, and full of love. They sat together as the sun set, watching Hope play with her toys. The nightmare was over. The healing had begun. And their family was whole. 5 years later, Sarah stood at a podium addressing a room full of military spouses and veterans. Her support group had grown from a handful of people in her living room to a national organization with chapters in 30 states. My name is Sarah Mitchell, she began, and 5 years ago, my newborn daughter was kidnapped from a delivery room by our HOA president. Today, I want to tell you that story, not because it's easy, but because your stories matter too. In the front row, Jake sat with Hope on his lap. The 5-year-old was the picture of health and happiness, her green eyes bright as she watched her mother speak. Sarah told the story. She didn't leave out the painful parts, the terror, the violation, the moment when she thought she'd lost everything. The room was silent, many people openly crying. But here's what I want you to remember, Sarah said, her voice strong. When I screamed for help, my husband came. In 8 seconds, he heard me and he came. And in the years since, so many others have come when I've called for help. Neighbors, friends, strangers who heard my story and decided to do better. She looked at the faces in the crowd. You are not alone. When someone targets you because your spouse is deployed, when someone tries to take advantage of your vulnerability, you have a community. You have us. And we will come, just like Jake came for me. The applause was thunderous. People stood, some saluting, all of them united. After the event, a young woman approached Sarah. She was pregnant and crying. My HOA is threatening to foreclose on my house while my husband is overseas. I don't know what to do. Sarah took her hand. You start by calling our legal hotline. We have lawyers who specialize in these cases. You're not fighting this alone anymore. Jake joined them, Hope now riding on his shoulders. We'll make sure you're taken care of. That's what we do now. We protect each other. As they drove home that evening, Hope chattered away in her car seat about the toys she had played with. Mama was really good, Hope announced proudly. Everyone clapped. Sarah smiled at her daughter in the rearview mirror. Thank you, sweetheart. Why do you tell the sad story, Mama? Hope asked. About when I was a baby. Sarah and Jake exchanged glances. Because sometimes bad things happen to good people, Sarah explained carefully. And when they do, we have two choices. We can hide and be scared, or we can stand up and help others. Did a bad lady try to hurt me? Yes, baby. But your daddy stopped her. He protected you. Hope thought about this seriously. Daddy is a hero. Yes, he is, Sarah agreed, her voice thick with emotion. And you're a hero too, Mama. You help people. Jake reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand as she wiped tears from her eyes. We're all heroes in this family. Even you, Hope. You survived something scary, and you grew up to be brave and kind. They drove through the night toward home, a family that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. The trauma would always be part of their story, but it didn't define them. What defined them was how they had chosen to respond. How they had turned pain into purpose. How they had built a community of healing and support. Sarah thought about that moment in the delivery room 5 years ago. The moment when Margaret had grabbed Hope, the moment when Sarah had screamed for help, the moment when Jake had appeared in 8 seconds. That moment had changed everything. It had shown her what true partnership looked like. It had taught her about courage and community. It had broken her and then shown her how to rebuild herself stronger. Her phone buzzed with a text from one of the women in her support group. Thank you for sharing your story today. You gave me hope. Sarah smiled and typed back, that's what hope does. She gives people hope. And it was true. Her daughter, who had come into the world amid trauma and terror, had become a symbol of resilience. Her name was a promise. Her life was proof that even the darkest moments could lead to light. Jake glanced at Sarah. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about how far we've come. How much we've built from the ashes of that day. We've come a long way, Jake agreed. 8 seconds, Sarah said softly. That's all it took to change everything. 8 seconds from my scream to your arrival. 8 seconds that saved our daughter. 8 seconds that started our journey. Jake reached over and took her hand. Best 8 seconds of my life. Sarah laughed through her tears. Mine too. Hope yawned in the back seat. I'm sleepy, Mama. We're almost home, baby, Sarah said. Home. It was a word that meant so much more now than it had 5 years ago. Home wasn't just a place. It was wherever they were together. It was the sanctuary they had built from love and determination and the refusal to let evil win. They pulled into their driveway, and Sarah looked at the house they had made into a home. The garden she and Hope had planted together. The swing set where Hope played every day. The porch where she and Jake sat in the evenings, watching the sunset and counting their blessings. This was what Margaret had tried to destroy. This peace, this love, this family. But she had failed. They had survived. They had thrived. They had turned their pain into a mission to help others. And Margaret Henderson was locked in a cell where she would spend the rest of her life, powerless and alone, while the family she had tried to break grew stronger every single day. Justice had been served. Healing had happened. Life had gone on. And it was beautiful. Sarah carried a sleeping Hope inside while Jake grabbed their bags. As she laid her daughter in bed and kissed her forehead, Sarah whispered a prayer of gratitude. For Jake, who had come when she needed him most. For Hope, who had survived and thrived. For the community they had built from tragedy. For the strength to turn pain into purpose. For the 8 seconds that had changed everything. And for the beautiful life they had built on the other side of trauma. The nightmare that had started in a delivery room had ended with a family stronger than ever, with justice served and healing begun, with a legacy of helping others that would continue for generations. Sarah turned off the light and closed the door softly. Tomorrow, she would wake up and continue the work. She would help more families. She would share more stories. She would build more hope. But tonight, she would sleep peacefully beside her husband, knowing that her daughter was safe in the next room, knowing that they had won, knowing that love had conquered hate. The 8-second miracle had become a lifetime of blessings. And that was the greatest victory of all.